Welcome to the Global Gratitude Summit. I'm Sharon Saraga Walters.
And I'm Luann Saraga Walters, and our guest today is known for combining head and heart in an approach to personal development that blends science, spirituality, and horns-grabbing joie de vivre. He is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School with a talent for translating that complex research that sometimes confuses us. So he makes it understandable for us all. Dr. Srini Pillay spent 17 years studying functional brain imaging and is an expert on the neurochemistry of panic. He now coaches high-achieving leaders on how to combat stresses and has written several books, including two that I want to mention: Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear, which actually won the Books for a Better Life Award. And then also another book called Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, which we'll hear about more in today's conversation. He's been an expert guest for CNN, Fox, NPR, the New York Times, and many more. And today we are so honored to have him join us on the second annual Global Gratitude Summit. Thank you, Dr. Pillay, for being on with us today. Wow.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always exciting for me to be talking about stuff that I love with people. I think of myself more as a channel for information rather than someone in whom the information originates. So I'm excited to hear your questions, and I'm happy to take this conversation in whatever direction evolves.
Well, thank you for sharing your skill set of being able to interpret the complex so that we can understand it. That's really what we're trying to do. I love to say this is where the woo-woo meets the wow, where we're looking at how research is actually supporting what we know to be true as evidenced experientially. So starting off, just kind of defining for us the definition of that connection between head and heart. So what does that look like?
One of the things I'm always interested in, and in fact, I have a current controversial view in medicine. I feel like we need to reinvent all of medicine, in part because when the human being is conceived, like a sperm joins an ovum and you get a fertilized egg, that egg then develops into an embryo, which then differentiates into multiple organs, which include a head, a heart, and a foot. But most originally, the head and the heart came from the same cell. And so the head and the heart are anatomically and embryologically always connected. So we know from birth the head and the heart came from the same cell. And then we know that even after they developed, the head maintained its connection with the rest of the body, including the heart. And so first we know embryologically they're connected. Secondly, we know anatomically they're connected. And then the third thing we know is that when we have feeling states that change our brains, those feeling states can change the way our hearts are beating. When we're afraid, our hearts beat a little faster, for example. So we know that physiologically they're also connected. So the head and the heart, I think, are always connected. And certainly abstractly, I feel like in general, when we talk about the head and the heart, we're talking about thinking and feeling. And Antonio Damasio wrote a beautiful book called Descartes' Error that described the human biology of how thinking and feeling cannot really be separated, that real human intelligence is often a combination of both. Like when you hear famous inventors, like scientists coming up with their discoveries, you very rarely hear them say things like, "Oh yeah, so I discovered like a formula." When they discover it, they do it with emotion. So even your very sort of technical thinking is accompanied by emotion at all times. So my firm conviction is that the head and the heart are always connected embryologically, anatomically, physiologically, and also abstractly through thinking and feeling.
I love how you've just shared that because you're talking the holistic aspect of us as a human being. And we have a tendency to try to compartmentalize who we are from what we think to how we respond to when we get sick and I remember when I was a kid growing up, I heard my dad actually was the first person I heard say, "Well, that cold's all in your head. I don't get sick." And I always thought, well, you're going to get sick because if a virus is out there, it's going to grab you and you're at no whim or control of getting something. But the way you describe it makes so much sense because embryonically we're from one cell. I think we forget that. How did you come up with this manner of explanation? Because it's awesome. It's very clear.
It is.
Well, I think part of it is that I've realized through my medical practice, and I also work in biotechnology. So I look at drugs across cancer, heart disease, stroke, and neurodegenerative diseases. And it's become apparent to me that we've gone a little bit too far astray into specialization. Like you have a problem with your head, you go see a psychiatrist or a neurologist. You have a problem with your heart, you see a cardiologist. You have a problem with your gut, you see a gut doctor. The problem with that is that we now know that the gut and the brain are connected. So if we don't address the generalities, then we're forgetting the fact that we're connected beings. And I think one of the things I love about your platform is that you want to empower people, and there's biological evidence for why it makes sense. Because we have brains that are wired to be able to change. Like our brains can change. And by changing our brains, no matter what comes at us in life, we can actually change our responses to those stresses and change the ways in which our bodies absorb those stresses as well.
Thank you for pointing that out too. And so we're going to, because it is the Global Gratitude Summit, we're taking what you just said and going to segue into the next question. Sharon, go ahead.
Yes. So, Dr. Pillay, what is gratitude's role in changing our perspective?
Mm, that's that.
So I have a lot of different things to sort of say about gratitude. I think that gratitude as a cognition is very helpful because it serves two fundamental purposes. It serves the purpose of reframing. So, how can I think about my life in a more holistic way? Because on a day-to-day basis, the brain's emotional center, the amygdala, registers all emotions. But fear jumps to the front of the line. And as a result of that, other emotions get left behind. So if you can have a conscious and purposeful cognitive way of saying, you know what, if I just let my brain be on autopilot, all it's going to think about the whole day is worry, 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 fear, fear, fear. If I say I want gratitude, then what your brain does is it starts to reframe your life. And it does this by refocusing, which is a different physiological procedure. But essentially it says, rather than looking at the 10 horrible things that happened today, I'm going to take my attention, which is like a flashlight, and place it on what I am grateful for. And so studies have shown that gratitude can actually, just even as a cognition, just by writing down what you are grateful for, it can improve your overall state of well-being, and it can change your actual physiology as well. That said, I think for this conversation, it's also important to mention that gratitude has also become what I call perfunctory gratitude. So when people use it, in general everyday parlance, they say things like, well, what are you grateful for? And sometimes you just feel sick to your stomach. You're like, I'm not feeling grateful right now. So why are you making me be grateful? Like I'm feeling annoyed. And it's sort of like, and so the other thing I'll say about that is that research shows that we are protected from depression, from anxiety, and from bodily symptoms if we can admit to the fact that we have mixed feelings. Very few people go through the whole day from the time they get up to the time they sleep saying, oh, look how grateful I am. It's so fantastic. Wow, you rejected me? That's grateful. Wow, you're not going to do this? It's grateful. Wow, I just dropped my coffee.
Thank you for that horrible experience.
Right. So I think mixed feelings are things that we should acknowledge, and we should recognize that we can set aside time for gratitude to be able to change our brains. Because in reality, gratitude can change your physiology. Talk about the connection between the head and the heart. Gratitude can actually drop your heart rate. So if you're feeling all anxious and you're feeling all taken by the day's events, it can actually drop your heart rate. It also helps to coordinate your brain so that you are in better emotional control and you feel much more motivated intrinsically. That said, I had an experience recently which I was very excited about. I was in Italy with a friend, and I was thinking, and it started raining, and we were going to go out for dinner, and I thought, why go out for dinner? The hotel is so nice, and they make such great food. Why don't we just stay there? And so we had been there for a while, and so the waiter came up to me and he said, well, gentlemen, what would you like to eat? Because you've eaten pretty much everything that you like on this menu. And I said, well, this is what I wanted, what I'd like. Could you tell me, as a child, and I had interpreted him to be a certain way because the day before I saw him mixing the steak tartare, he did it with so much passion. I was like, this guy definitely has like some kind of core heart experience with the world. And so I said, I saw you mixing the steak tartare yesterday, which gave me a sense, and I don't know if this is true, but it gave me a sense that you had a very close connection with your mother. And I would bet a lot of money that she probably cooked a certain way that made you jump in your seat as a child. And he said, that's exact. I love food. That's why I like serving you, because you like food and I like food. I said, well, can you ask the chef to make us an appetizer and an entree that made you jump in your seat as a child? And so he brought the food over. And when we looked at the food, we were almost in tears because the food looked incredible. It tasted delicious. And rather than saying, I'm so great, of course we said thank you, but rather than saying that, it was our utter joy in receiving what he was giving that communicated the gratitude before we even said the words thank you. In fact, the next time we go to this hotel every year, the next time we went, he said, you know what, just today, leave the food to me. I know what kind of food you like. I know what you feel like. And he said, every time you come, the whole wait staff gets happy because they see the happiness in your face when you're eating your food. And so I feel like gratitude is not just about saying thank you, it's about feeling thank you. It's about feeling a sense of that you can't believe you are actually connected in such an intimate way with someone outside of you. And I actually think one of the purposes of gratitude is to acknowledge the fact that we are not as separate as we think we are. And here's how this makes sense biologically. So biologically, it's really weird, but every person in the world who we encounter through any sense has basically entered our body. If you see someone, they are in your visual cortex, which means they're not outside your brain, they are inside your brain tissue, which means that no human beings are separate from any other human beings they have encountered. When I work with executives, I will say to them, they'll say, oh, should I hire this person or not? And I said, well, do you want them to live in your brain? Because you should hang out with people you want to live in your brain tissue. And if you treat people poorly, those unhappy people are going to be living in your brain. So I think what gratitude does is it provides a container of recognition that as states of consciousness, and this is my firm belief as well, our heads, your head, my head, they're more like beads on a chain than separate buoys floating out of water. And I think gratitude is a recognition that consciousness connects us all. And so I think you can go from the pure cognition to the kind of embodied gratitude where you're jumping in your seat because the meatballs are so delicious, or to a place where you recognize, you know what, it's kind of cool because it's amazing that life can be as it is and that I have this life to live. Now, with the caveats that if you're not feeling great, you can accept the fact that you have a not feeling great time. But I think the more we learn to be aware of gratitude, the more we will be able to set aside time to have this amazing experience that can change our physiology.
Wow. So as you were speaking, the term that comes up a lot that I use and others use is vibration. So how is that into what you're saying? I love what you're saying, but that word, is it just from the lay person that we're using that word vibration?
I think vibration is an indication that you are connecting with something beyond the literal, that you are actually operating as a whole being, and that the state of functional connectivity in your brain, in the zoneness, and the state of connection with the rest of your body, that somehow that embryological truth that everything came from one cell is getting manifested in the moment. And I think vibration, to a large extent, relates to the fact, and this is an opinion, which I can back up with facts, but I think it's largely an opinion, that actually our brains, rather than being the originators of consciousness, are actually channels of consciousness. So vibration between people arises when you open up the channel of connection, because when you open up that channel of connection, you realize that we don't just have to exist listening to someone's words. That even when we're communicating using technology, the beauty about this technology is not that it creates our connection, it enables it. And the vibration, I think, is being open to the fact that the connection already exists.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That also makes me think of how, dogs are so aware of the signals that we send. They can, and animals, they can smell the fear, they can smell the love, they can smell or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm saying smell. It may not even be that, but it's that essence that you're talking about. You studied the neurochemistry of panic, and I know you're familiar with other emotions. I think that that's something that is becoming more um, accepted or more present, I guess, in our associations of our emotions and whatnot. And can you talk just a little bit about that and how there's a chemistry, or is there a molecular structure to emotions? Is there, what does that mean, the neurochemistry of an emotion?
So emotions are very highly debated field right now. There are even some researchers who believe they don't exist. I'm not sure which world they're in, but but they believe they don't exist. An emotion essentially is an outward expression of a physiologic change that correlates with the way that physiology has changed. So if you are exposed to danger, for example, or a threat, you might develop the emotion of fear. If you are excited about somebody because you're grateful, you might experience an emotion of happiness. Now, when we experience emotions, there are changes that go on in our bodies. The first thing is that the amygdala, which is an almond shaped structure deep in the brain, registers all emotions. And this amygdala is connected through a number of pathways to the rest of the body, the adrenal glands, it's connected to the heart. So when we have changes that go on in the brain, meaning, so let's say I say to you, let's say we make one another happy, right? So that change influences your neurons. It changes the electrical activity in the neurons, and that electrical activity changes your brain chemistry. And as a result of this, the impulses that then travel from your brain to your heart and the rest of your body impact the rest of your body. This is so powerful that people have now recognized, and this is right now my evolving area of interest for the next 20 years, is going to be around stress as an epigenetic factor, meaning
Oh, cool.
that genes, we now know that genes can change and cause diseases like cancer, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease. And we know that stress can turn genes on and off. And when it turns genes on, it can cause those diseases. And when it turns things off, so that to me is a really overt demonstration of the fact that that any emotion that you experience can affect not just the way you're feeling, but it can affect your body as well. And there's a whole group of researchers within the field of psychiatry called the psychosomatic researchers
Mhm.
who look at the connections between emotions and the brain and the rest of the body, physical symptoms and physical illness. So emotions do change brain chemistry because we come fully loaded with a bunch of chemicals in our brains already. And actually, to the point of connection, if you think about what we're all experiencing right now, we have neurons in our brains called mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons reflect other people's emotions. So if I feel a certain emotion, you're going to feel that. If it's inauthentic, you're going to feel that. If it's authentic, you're going to feel that. And the same for me. But what's really interesting to your point about dogs and scents is there was a study done where people were located in India and in France, and they hooked up the brains of the people in one of those in India to a computer and the internet, and and the internet was on, and they basically connected to the person in France, and they had them think words like "hola," like in Spanish. The person, they couldn't see each other, they couldn't hear each other. Yet, when the person thought a word, that word was transmitted long distance from one country to another, and the other person was able to predict what the person was thinking because the internet was turned on, which means if we figure out how to tune into the right station,
Mhm.
our levels of connection with one another could really be enhanced. And what that means for emotions is, like when people have things like some meditation summits in order to create world peace, what they're talking about is tuning into a certain frequency so that your emotional state impacts the emotional state of everyone, because emotions can be transmitted short distance through mirror neurons, long distance, the way I just described, and they can also change we can change one another's chemistry and actual physiology and brain activations as well as a result of the emotions we feel.
Oh my gosh. That is so and so my wife is a twin. and talking about coming from one cell, and then she's an identical twin, and then splitting in two, that mirror neuron thing. But I love that. And this is, oh my gosh, I feel like we've just enrolled in Harvard. I love this. Thank you so much. Okay. So that's going to take us then into knowing that there is the connection and the ability for our neurons or our emotions to take certain shapes and chemistry, molecular action of some kind. Ask him that next.
So, discuss a little of your work with Harvard Health and the mindset for burnout.
That shift.
So burnout is just so common these days, and it's increasing more and more. And if you look at the causes of burnout, Maslach and Lader have done an incredible job really helping us understand what burnout is, what causes burnout, what the stages of burnout are. There are a bunch of different causes that all fall into one of several categories, like work overload, or a conflicting workforce, or absence of community, or feeling like things are unfair at work. Now, every day we experience these stresses, and when we can do nothing about them, this burns us out. So one of the things we can do is, a lot of people feel like, well, it's never going to change unless I get less work, unless I like the people I work with. But it's very hard in any work environment to actually get less work and to actually have people start to like you, or you start to like people you don't like. But what you can do is change your brain and how your brain responds to people in general. So an example, so my last book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, talks about the unfocused mind. And when I said this first to people, they were like, who's going to buy that book? Like, we're distracted enough. Like, I don't need to learn how to become unfocused. And I said, well, what people don't realize is that we live in a culture that's obsessed with focus. And although I really think focus is great, it can help us get through the day, it can help us learn information. The truth is, there are distinct disadvantages to focus that lead to burnout. So the first is that focus eats up brain energy. Mm-hmm. And so one study was done where they took people looking at a video as usual and a video with intense focus. And then at the end, they asked them questions about how they would save someone in trouble. The people who focused couldn't care less. They had used all their brain energy on focusing. They couldn't care less. The people who watch it as usual had the mental capacity to care. And so they were able to care. And when you fed the people who were too focused glucose, they started to care again, which means that burnout is a state of depletion of brain energy. We call it self-regulation depletion. And the mindset shift there is to build periods of unfocus into your day so you can learn how not to burn yourself out. So these periods, I always say to people, most people don't realize that we do spend a lot of our days not on task anyway. So what I say to people is, choose a couple times when your brain would, most people do focus, 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 fatigue, right? But what I recommend is do focus.
That's me.
Right. But why not go focus, refuel, focus, refuel? If I told you, let's go from Boston to California, you're not just going to drive. You're going to stop and fill some gas in. You need gas in the tank for you to go through the day. But what we do is we think we can get through the whole day and then full gas in the tank at the end of the day. By then we're exhausted and we're off to sleep. So if we learn how to build these strategic breaks, just 20 minutes, either at lunch, just after lunch, or mid-afternoon, or in the evening, and you try one of these techniques that I'll tell you about now, you can actually learn how not to be burnt out. So the first is really quite simple. It's simply napping. So napping for 5 to 15 minutes can actually create 1 to 3 hours of clarity.
Wow.
So a lot of times after lunch, we're like, no, I got to get this done. And we try to basically run with a tank that's progressively getting emptier. Why not refuel that tank with napping? You get 1 to 3 hours of clarity, and it changes the way you're operating. So that's the first. The second is doodling. So doodling, just scribbling on a piece of paper, can improve memory by 29%. Now, it's a little controversial. There's a recent study showed that it had no impact. So I think what people are realizing is that all of these techniques depend on the individual. The third technique is what we call positive constructive daydream, which basically means when we daydream, like when we sit at the desk and our minds are floating up, it's not that helpful. Or if we did something a little regrettable, maybe we had too much to drink the night before, we said something regrettable, and we ruminate about it the next day, that's not helpful. However, if we daydream, and when we're daydreaming, we are doing something low key at the same time, then doing something low key allows your mind to float off and it becomes replenished. You actually get refueled. And so in the book, I describe this and a lot of other techniques which you can incorporate in the day in order to refuel your brain so that you're not burnt out.
So I know I'm going to jump in on this because Sharon had a part two, but I wanted to pull in what you had just said about that last bit of the positive daydreaming. And a lot of times, so a couple of things. You talk about taking a break, doing instead of completely depleting yourself, going self-care. It seems to be that time of saying, okay, I need to refresh. I need to take a nap. I need to do something that engages me in a different way, or positive daydreaming. Could that also, how would gratitude tie into that? Because that positive daydreaming almost sounds a little bit like vision work in some way, like saying, and I don't want to take the work away of it and say vision play to make it more appealing, but that sounds like a possible aspect of that tool.
Yes, absolutely. So, in order to do positive constructive daydreaming, you actually need to be able to have some kind of emotional control. And so, gratitude increases emotional control and it also increases self motivation, which means that you have the intrinsic energy to be able to do any of these exercises. When you have gratitude, it allows you to then, in having better emotional control, it allows you to do things like possibility thinking, right? So if you're in a negative frame of mind, you're like, I hate everything, the world's terrible, like, and you come home and I say, just think about the amazing possibilities in life. You would tell me, no, I don't want to think about this. There's no amazing possibilities. But if you train your mind to go into a place of gratitude first, where you have better emotional control, you can then use what I call possibility thinking. And studies now show that when you belief in itself can increase the brain's activation of the reward system and increase dopamine. They can also increase natural opioids that are in your brain. So you feel more relaxed. So, in summary, gratitude allows you a refocus from the stresses of the day to be able to engage possibility thinking. So you can ask yourself, you can do what I call self-esteem optimization, different kind of SEO, rather than self-esteem maintenance. So most people just try to get through the day. They're like, that's great. I'm not going to try too hard. But self-esteem optimization is asking, what is possible? And given that I know what's possible, how can I take what is possible and then reverse engineer what I need to engineer to make that happen?
Wow. I tell you what, this has been just such an enjoyable already half hour with you. For everything, here are a couple of things that I have as takeaways, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners have far, far more. But one of the concepts that I've not heard anybody speak about was something you said at the beginning, that gratitude is intimate, that it's an intimate connection between people, that we are sharing of ourselves, like the description you gave of the restaurant and the chef in Italy, and how you really became part of each other's lives with that. The the mirror neurons, and how we can actually replicate what's out there, and we give off certain emotions or that gratitude feeling to others. I love possibility thinking, and I'm going to start using SEO in my talks as self esteem optimization, which is fantastic. So, thank you so much, Dr. Pillay. We just have one more question for you in wrapping up this talk with you.
Yeah. So, Dr. Pillay, what is your personal definition of gratitude?
I think gratitude is a state of recognizing the intrinsic connection and the capability for ebb and flow between human beings.
Mm.
And I think it is an unforced embodiment of delight, which I believe, when we are fortunate enough to experience that, can create a sensation of being in touch with the divine.
Mm,
Wow, that's beautiful.
it is.
Oh, I just love the aspect of being in touch with the divine too. Wow. Dr. Pillay, thank you so much for just
Thank
taking
you very much.
time out of your morning and sharing it with us today. I
Thank
am
you.
I am now an avid Rabid fan, and I'm going to go going to Amazon to get especially Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, but also I'm very interested in Life Unlocked, so I have to check that out as well.
Yes, thank you
Oh,
so much for being on the summit. You know, I know that so many people hearing you, it's just going to be amazing. You just really
thank
take gratitude to educate us into such another place. Thank you so much.
thank you both very much.
Awesome. And so look for Dr. Pillay on Amazon, I'm sure in your local bookstore, et cetera, to find his expertise and experience and fantastic research. And we will see you again the next time on the Global Gratitude Summit.